Gemma Archer is an EAP teacher and program coordinator in the ELT unit at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. She's also the joint coordinator of the IATEFL Pronunciation Special Interest Group, which goes by the title of PronSIG. She's the former editor of PronSIG's biannual journal, Speak Out, co-author of Teaching English Pronunciation for a Global World, the book I've just talked about, and her research interests lie in the field of pronunciation, pedagogy, and accent, and the issues which can arise when students and teachers of English are confronted with diverse regional and global varieties of English. And she kind of talked a bit about that today, I suspect, because I got tripped up. There's a video coming up in this talk, I'll give you that, and I got completely tripped up by it when I was in rehearsal with it. Anyway, more about that coming up. Gemma, I'll hand the floor to you. Enjoy your talk, and we're here if you need us. You need to turn on your mic.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay, Sean? Hopefully.
Now, yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Perfect.
Fantastic. I'm so happy to be here, everyone. As Sean said, the English language teaching world is so small. So delighted to see Sean and to see all of you in the chat there. And yeah, let me jump in straight away because time is moving on and I don't want to rush anything. So my goal for this session is very simple. I want to simplify the teaching of pronunciation for you. If you are anything like me, from the beginning of my career, for about 10 years after in teaching English, I had no clue how to teach pronunciation. So I want to simplify that. If you're like me or you were like me, hopefully the priorities that I'm going to share in the coming hour will help you, will demystify the teaching of pronunciation, particularly in the global classroom. So let me share what these priorities are going to be, which I hope will simplify these for you. So I'm going to talk about what to teach with regards to pronunciation instruction. I'm going to talk about choosing to teach certain features receptively or productively. I'm going to talk about setting a suitable student-centered pronunciation syllabus. I'm going to talk about relatable role models for your students. And the last thing is achievable goals for your students. So let's jump in straight away. As I said just a moment ago, I was a teacher who had no idea how to teach pronunciation. I didn't even know it was important for so many years. I had very little training in pronunciation. And when I tried, I used little exercises from course books which didn't match my accent and which I didn't understand. And I just ended up completely embarrassing myself and really confusing my students. So the content I want to share comes not only from my heart, because it's the content I wish someone had given me when I was teaching in those early years, but it also comes from the book that my colleague Robin Walker and I have recently published, which is called Teaching the Pronunciation of English for a Global World. So if you're interested in this content, it's inspired by what we've talked about in that book. So this really defines me at the start of my career. I had decision paralysis. As I started to get more experience teaching, as I started to get more training and more professional development, I started to realize that, okay, pronunciation is kind of important. My students want it, they request it, they need it. This is something I need to learn more about, and I need to deal with my confidence issues. So I knew that it was important, but I just couldn't get started. I didn't know where to begin. I was flipping through pages in pronunciation books going, what should I do? What should I do? No, I'm not confident with this particular sound. I'll try something else. Oh, I want to teach this. Oh, but I can't find the resources that I need. Oh, I don't have time to make the resources that I need. Oh, never mind. Or if I relied on the little pronunciation boxes in my textbook, it was signaling to me, okay, I can do this in 5 minutes at the end of my lessons. It's not really important. I'll just see if I have time. If I have time, I'll fit in this little exercise, rather than integrate it into my lesson and into all of the stages of my lesson, which we can and should be doing. So have you ever felt this way, this decision paralysis concerning pronunciation? Not just me, hopefully. So that was definitely me. I didn't know where to begin. And I hear this a lot from teachers. They come to my sessions, they say, I know I need to teach pronunciation, but where do I start? I don't know. Lots of you are saying yes in the comments. Thank you. It's not just me then. It wasn't just me. All right, so what can we do then to overcome this decision paralysis? Well, 2 things that I learned liberated me. They set me free from this decision paralysis. And that was, I didn't have to, learning about goals. Because for so long, I believed that I had to teach my students to speak like a native speaker, like the Queen. And as you probably hear, that's certainly not my accent at all, or like a general American speaker. There was these 2 pronunciation goals, neither of which I spoke. And I felt quite, again, this contributed to my paralysis with teaching pronunciation. But then I learned about this other goal, international intelligibility. And as I said, this set me free. This removed my decision paralysis. And I also learned about something called the lingua franca core, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So when learning about international intelligibility, of course, we start to learn about the reality of who is really speaking and using English today. English is a global language. We know that certainly in 2019, it was estimated that there was 3 L2 non-native users of English to every 1 native speaker. Today, it's estimated to be something like 2 billion users of English, L2 users of English, compared with just 400 million L1 native speakers. So again, I started to realize that for my students, it was very low likelihood that they would only be using English just with these prestige native speakers that their course books were full of. It was unlikely that these are the only people they would be using English with. But it was very likely that they would be using English with other L2 users like themselves in their life. So as I said, this really changed my perspective and led me into learning about English as an international language or a common language or as a lingua franca. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the lingua franca core. If you're not familiar with that, don't worry, I'm going to provide an explanation. The next thing you're going to see is something called a sketch note. A sketch note is it's a drawing, basically. I'm not an artist. It's a drawing which summarizes a piece of information. And it comes from a course that I took by a colleague of mine called Emily Bryson. If you don't know Emily Bryson, she is a graphic facilitator. She teaches teachers how they can use small, basic drawings to help clarify communication in the classroom and how to make communication memorable and engaging for students. So I took Emily's course on graphic facilitation, and I decided that I was going to theme all of my drawings around pronunciation. So what I've done in my next slide is I have summarized the lingua franca core in a sketch. Again, I'm not an artist. So let me explain what the lingua franca core is. A lady called Jennifer Jenkins was a PhD student in the 1990s, and she was researching international intelligibility in her students. And over several years, she recorded her students communicating with one another. So we're talking about L2 to L2 communication, no native speakers. And what she found was that when she was listening to students and she was categorizing whenever there was a mispronunciation that caused a breakdown in communication, she saw that certain features were more likely to cause a breakdown, a misunderstanding than others. So she said those features should be prioritized. We should prioritize the things that are most likely to cause this breakdown in communication, so the students have time to really maximize their intelligibility, so that they will be understood more easily, be more intelligible speakers in the world. So the features that she found were most important were all consonant sounds, except for the dental fricatives, th and the, like in thing or there. The reason that these two consonants are not part of the the most important section is because lots of speakers use alternative sounds to these to this. So they might use d or t or s instead of th, and they can still be very intelligible and easily understood. So we know that dental fricatives, they're not important for intelligibility. We can have some flexibility there. So consonant sounds apart from those dental fricatives are important. Consonant clusters are also important for intelligibility. Now, a consonant cluster is when we have 2, 3, or 4 consonant sounds all together in a row with no vowel sounds to separate them. This is a common feature for English, but not all languages have this. And so our students, some students, depending on their L1, their mother tongue, they can really struggle with these sounds. But they are important for intelligibility, particularly if the cluster comes at the beginning of a word or in the middle. Another thing which she found was important for intelligibility was maintaining a vowel length contrast. So by that, it was making a vowel shorter or longer depending on what followed it or where its context. So for example, if a vowel is followed by an unvoiced consonant, typically that vowel will be shorter, whereas if the vowel is followed by a voiced consonant, typically the vowel will be longer. For example, mat, mad, bat, bad, cap, cab. The final thing that she found important for intelligibility was nuclear stress. Now, this has lots of different names. Some people call it tonic stress, some people call it sentence stress, and some people call it focus word stress. But simply put, nuclear stress is when we make one word in a phrase or an utterance. One word is emphasized more than all of the other words. So it's stressed, the most stressed word in a phrase or in a clause. So these are the features which are most important for international intelligibility when we have two L2 speakers communicating together, not when we have L1 native speakers in the conversation. In the middle, we have that dental fricative, as I've just mentioned, but we also have word stress. Now, this is the time when people start to turn off from the lingua franca core, because I'm sure if you're like me, there's been quite a few anecdotal moments in your classrooms when word stress error has caused a breakdown in communication with you and your students. Now, basically what Jennifer Jenkins said about word stress, not that it was unimportant, but that it was a grey area, that there just wasn't enough evidence in her study to show that it had a place in the most important section of this. And that's been replicated by other studies since. Some studies say that word stress is important for intelligibility, others say not. So at the moment, we're still a bit unsure about word stress. However, I do teach word stress, and I think it's a great introduction to the topic of nuclear stress. So that was in the middle. Towards the end, what we have is the least important features for intelligibility. And these are producing, and note I've underlined producing, a schwa, or reduced vowels or weak forms, or producing, again, underlined, producing connected speech. I don't think you can see it, but in the little speech bubbles here in my drawing, one of them is saying, what time is it? Is it? Connecting is and it together. And the listener responds by saying it's 10 to 2, 10 to 2, 10 to 10 to 2. with that 2 in the middle reduced down to a schwa. So these features are not important for international intelligibility, but we aren't going to forget about them. We're going to come back and talk about them a little bit more in just a few minutes. So this was my little basic sketch note. I hope you liked it. Now I'm going to show you a proper formal table which summarizes this information in probably a much nicer form. So this table comes from my colleague and my co-author, Robin Walker. Robin has the most fantastic blog, englishglobal.com. I definitely recommend you look it up. And on his blog, he did a wonderful series called the A to Z of Pronunciation. And the L in that A to Z was the lingua franca core. So he's got a great series on the lingua franca core. And in that particular article, he has this table with a kind of a traffic light system where all of the things we need to prioritize are in green for go. Everything in the middle is orange, and then the non-core features which we should not prioritize for production are in red. And note that he also includes damaging to ELF intelligibility. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So I would certainly recommend checking out Robin's blog. But yes, this gives you a more formal presentation of what the lingua franca core is. So yes, the lingua franca core set me free. It liberated me. I no longer was paralyzed with fear and lack of confidence about what to teach. Someone gave me the key. They said, if you teach these features, these green features, you will improve your students' intelligibility. And that was enough for me to get me started. Someone's mentioned in the blog, I think Sabina has said, what's the name of the blog? Englishglobal.com, Robin Walker. Yes, thank you, Sean. Sean's put the link in. It's a fantastic, fantastic resource. Okay, so we've talked about what to teach. That's one way of considering what to teach and reducing your decision paralysis. The next priority I'm going to talk about is deciding what to teach receptively and what to teach productively. And maybe my little drawing and that table has given you an idea of what I'm going to talk about here. So I mentioned course books at the beginning of this session and how they can sometimes lead us into believing that pronunciation is less important, or it's just to be focused on at the end of the lesson in 10 minutes, you know, that little box in the textbook. But something that textbooks and resources are also doing is they are potentially setting students up to fail with regards to pronunciation. I'm quoting here a researcher called Marek Kichkowiak, who looked at an array of popular teaching resources. And he looked in particular at what type of activities, what type of pronunciation activities were being used in these books to teach pronunciation. And he found that most of the activities were teaching things like connected speech, assimilation, where sounds come together and change, vowel reduction, so the use of a schwa instead of a full vowel, as well as prestige model vowel replication. So teaching students to produce vowels identically to a native speaker model. But what the problem with this is that these features here, which you probably saw in the red part of Robin's table and on the far side of my sketch note, these are not necessary for internationally intelligible English communication. They're not necessary. In fact, what we're going to discover is they can reduce international intelligibility. They can have a negative impact on our listeners. And again, coming back to this idea of setting our students up to fail, we know that it is very, very unlikely that our students are going to become native-like speakers of English. It's very unusual for any language learner to develop a native-like accent. And we know that it's also unnecessary for them to do so. Sure, it's possible. If that is their goal, I'm not going to say, no, I will not teach you. But there are things that we can do to support them and to gently show them that they have options, and their option is not just to become a native-like user of English. So we've talked about what we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't, or it's maybe not the best idea, to teach students to produce these red items from the table, teaching students to produce connected speech, teaching students to produce assimilation or reduced vowel sounds. It's not a great use of our time when we know that it's not necessary for intelligibility and can be the opposite. It can reduce intelligibility. But what we are saying is it can be a great thing to teach receptively. It can be great for students' listening comprehension if we take the time to break down what they are hearing and point out what is going on in the speech that they're listening to. Again, sorry, going back to textbooks for a second, you probably have realised yourself that in our textbooks, the scripts, the listening scripts, are performed by actors most of the time, and they're spoken very carefully. And that means that students are not getting exposed to the features of authentic English as it is truly spoken by different speakers from different countries. So we can do that ourselves. We can provide that input, and it can be called listening decoding or pronunciation for listening. We know that even advanced learners of English report struggling to understand spontaneous speech. Because of these features, again, we're coming back to the same things: connected speech, assimilation, reduced vowel sounds. All of these things can reduce international intelligibility. So what can we do? Well, there is a great way that we can introduce the effects, the consequences that these features have for our listeners, and make our students aware of how these can impact those that we're communicating with. So I'm going to show you something in just a second called a trictation. Now, this comes from the wonderful materials writer Mark Hancock. And I'm sure Mark Hancock needs no introduction to any of you. He's a wonderful creator of pronunciation resources. For example, PronPack. If you've used PronPack, you'll know it's a wonderful series of books. He also wrote pronunciation games, and he has lots of other books that he's recently published on listening, decoding, and all of these kind of features of authentic speech. And Mark wrote this wonderful article last year in Modern English Teacher about listening, decoding, and pronunciation. And he introduced something called a trictation. Now, this is based on the word dictation with a trick, and Sean mentioned that a little bit earlier. Now, what does that mean, a trictation? So Mark talked about phrasal homophones, which are phrases which, when written, they are different, but when spoken, they sound identical. For example, here we have painting a view, painting a view, painting a view, buy her a turn, buy a return, buy a return. So just by saying this a little bit faster, suddenly the phrases sound the same. Watch a problem, watch a problem, watch a problem. Packs and bags, packs and bags, packs and bags. So I'm saying the same phrase, just a little bit faster, with reduced vowel sounds, with connected speech, with assimilation, and suddenly what I'm saying changes. It looks like and sounds like something else. In his article, which is wonderful, I would definitely recommend you looking on the Modern English Teacher website and looking it up. Mark talks about how those of us that want to teach listening and want to introduce the intricacies of listening to authentic speech, we often use our scripts, the scripts from the book, to highlight or bring out any moments in the script which look challenging for our students. And what he said was that typically when teachers do this, they focus more on lexical challenges, so tricky words or different, features of grammar, but rarely are pronunciation features talked about. And that's because, and again, this is the genius of it, is that the tricky parts of pronunciation are in the simple language. They're in the function words, the pronouns, the prepositions, the articles, not in the complex or tricky vocabulary. Or it could be, but there's a lot of really interesting, rich stuff to explore in the simple language. So I'm going to give you a trictation that I use with my own students, and Sean's going to help me with this in just a second. Now, before we do this, I need to say my students are postgraduates. They are PhD students and master's students. So they're all upper intermediate and higher. So I chose this knowing that they would cope with the language used in it. If this is something that you want to use, of course, choose a trictation that is appropriate for your students' context and their language level. Now, when Sean comes on, he's going to play a short video for us. This video is an authentic video. It comes from something that popped up in my YouTube randomly about whales and sharks. I know, it was one of those things that just popped up and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So when you listen, you're going to first see two possible phrases. And I'd like you to, just for a second, listen and see what you think you're hearing. Sean, am I right in thinking that I can play this, or do you have to play it? Just
no, you can play it.
Perfect. Okay, great. So let me show you what I mean. It'll be easier to explain. So we have two sentences here. And so does the regression, and so does their aggression. So you're going to hear this phrase in a moment, and I'd like you to say what you hear. Do you hear A or do you hear B? Okay, here we go.
And so does the regression. And so does the regression. And so does the regression.
I'll give you a moment right into the chat what you hear. Now look at everyone else's answers. Do we all have the same? Some A's, some B's. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so now I'm going to play the whole thing. And I want you to see if you're able to check if you were correct.
And so does the regression. And so does the regression. And so does the regression. Bull sharks breed between the months of June and September on Reunion Island. And during this mating season, male testosterone levels go up, and so does the regression. And so does the regression. And so does the regression. And so does the regression.
I'll give you a minute to watch and see. Aha. Anwar has said both. Interesting. Okay. Context. Yep, context is important. Now, someone said I was wrong, but were you? Were you wrong? So the point of a trictation is that everyone is right. Because when we look at the two sentences written in their written form, they are different. Yeah, they look different, but when we hear them, due to connected speech, due to reduced vowel sounds, due to assimilation, they sound identical. So this exercise is to highlight the consequence of these features. We need the context to understand. We cannot just by listening choose the right answer, because when we listen with all of these features of authentic speech, the phrases are identical. So Mark Hancock in his text that I took this from, he talks about, the teacher reading one of these trictations aloud, asking students to write down what they hear. and then putting both answers up on the board and showing that actually everyone has it right, whether they wrote, painting of you or painting of you, everyone gets it correct. So it's just a way to highlight how significant, how considerable the effect of these things are on our listener. Do they promote international intelligibility or do they reduce international intelligibility? So from my perspective, and certainly from the research that I've read, it's not necessary for our students to be producing these particular features to be understood in an international context, but they will hear them at some point. So we can point them out, we can do listening decoding in the classroom to help them receptively so that they can understand what they are hearing. And I hope you agree with me on that. Okay, let's move on. So we're moving on to our third priority, setting the syllabus. And this is focusing on setting a student-centered pronunciation syllabus. Again, coming back to this idea of reducing your decision paralysis and making pronunciation an easier process for you to teach in the classroom. At the beginning of this session, I obviously talked a lot about the lingua franca core. This is a great way to choose what pronunciation features you want to teach. But there are some other options that would be more student-centered, depending on your students, of course. So alternative things you can do to set your pronunciation syllabus and choose what you need to teach, what you want to teach, is by observing your students as they do a communicative task. For example, if they are doing a dictation task, or if they're doing an information gap fill activity with a partner, you can set students up with this and you can observe them unobtrusively, making notes of any features that you hear them being mispronounced or you hear them mispronouncing. An alternative option is ask your students to record a short communicative activity on a mobile phone for homework and email it to you. This is something I really like to do because you can listen as many times as you want and they can practice as many times as they want as well. The reason this is great is because they have privacy from home. The only person is listening is the teacher, so they don't have to be as worried usually. You can use a paragraph from a listening script that you've done in class, something that is communicative that students will read and reproduce and record and then send on to you for your listening, and so you can identify any words or any features that they are struggling to pronounce intelligibly. Another option is to have a discussion with your students, an honest discussion. What are their plans for English in the future? Where are they planning to use it? Who are they going to be speaking to? Are they going to stay in their home country? Are they going to work in the tourism industry? Will they be working in science or education? Will they be in aviation? So all of these different contexts have a use for English. And if we know what our students' plans are, or at least a little bit of knowledge about what they're planning to use their English for, we can choose tasks, we can choose activities that reflect their future use and intentions for English. So it leads to a more student-centered activity and syllabus for pronunciation instruction. So this gives you some options if you don't want to just follow the lingua franca core. What I have here comes from Robin and I's book, Teaching English Pronunciation for a Global World, and it comes from this second option, asking students to record an activity. So it's basically a needs analysis or a diagnostic test, or even a progress test if you were teaching and wanted to check students' production of something that you had worked on previously. In the book, we introduce a context where you had been teaching a listening section of your course book or a resource, which was about astronomy, about stars, space, etc. And it contains lots of features from, for example, the lingua franca core in this particular example. So consonant clusters, certain consonant sounds. Of course, this is just part of a score sheet. If you had a full one, it could be longer and it could contain more features. And we then include the words that we want students to be pronouncing for us. Again, great to get them to record this and send you their recording. And then we can listen back to their recording and put a tick next to each word or each feature which is pronounced intelligibly, or a cross. And the further feedback section allows us to note down any advice that we want to give them, or feedback or encouragement to help them get closer to producing it more intelligibly. So it gives some nice student-centered feedback, and that can be very motivating as well. So we can do this in various different ways. I'm now going to move on, and the next priority is talking about relatable role models. And again, I know, broken record, I am talking again about textbooks. I think for a very long time, and I'm sure you'll agree in your own experience, there's been two goals represented in so many of our resources, and that is the native speaker model, either a general American speaker or a received pronunciation standard British English speaker, Queen's English, BBC English, etc. As we know, these are not often achievable models for our students. They are difficult and challenging for them to become native-like. So we want to offer them some more options. These are not the only goals for them to choose from. And so this next stage will focus on something which was introduced by the late researcher Darnier, who wrote some wonderful research on motivation. And this particular section will talk about near-peer role models. A near-peer role model is someone from your student's language background, so they have the same mother tongue as your student, but they are more proficient. They're further ahead in their pronunciation journey. And this can be very motivating for students to see a near-peer role model. A couple of years ago, as you know, I'm part of, joint coordinator of IATEFL PronSIG, the pronunciation SIG, and we have a journal called Speak Out. And a couple of years ago, Neil Curry wrote this wonderful article on near-peer role models. It's difficult to say, near-peer role models, for us for that publication, which I'm now going to quote from. And he calls near-peer role models proof of what's possible. Near peers are a powerful device for the pursuit of the ideal L2 self, where the success of others can help us see such a future for ourselves, a possible future, a real future. Therefore, to use the ideal L2 self as a motivational tool, near peer role models are a prerequisite. So let's talk about why near peers can be so suitable for our students. So near peers can support our students move away from these limited goals of L1-centric models, such as just General American or just Standard British English. It can lead them away from that and show them an alternative, which is their own voice, their own accent, speaking intelligibly. What else can a near peer role model do? It can provide our students with more autonomy, because rather than being dependent on the teacher to tell them what they should be speaking like, they are looking to their role model, and they're being motivated by their role model and their role model's pronunciation. And as I mentioned before, it can be extremely motivating for students to see someone like them from the same L1 background being a successful and intelligible speaker in the global stage. Because we're thinking about someone who is well known, someone who is easy for them to access. This could be their teacher, of course, but what I'm going to suggest next is that you look to someone who is famous or well known. So I'm going to suggest a nice homework assignment, which both my colleague Robin and I have had great success with. And this is to ask students to find their near peer role model. We want them to go out and research or investigate, someone from their L1 background, so same mother tongue, same language, who is now a proficient, fluent speaker of English. Not native-like, successful in their own voice. So students need to go out and find their role model. So they might have to, go on YouTube or social media and look at people that they know from their country speaking English, some people that are well known. And what they will do is they will take notes, or they will collect links of recordings that they like, creating a little library or folder of examples of their near peer as they speak English. And over time, this can be a motivational tool or a resource. They can go and listen to their near peer, or they can emulate or imitate their near peer if they wish. So it can be a nice way, again, to just show them an alternative option from this traditional, just British or American English. It gives them this real achievable alternative, which can be really empowering and inspirational and motivating. I'd love to hear who were your near peer role models if you have them. If you are an L2 user of English, was there anyone from your country or from your language background who you saw speaking English that really inspired you? Or if you're a learner of another language, is there anyone that really inspired you that you heard speaking that language? I'll give you a minute. Share in the chat with us. Ah, yeah, a friend from another town. My teachers, yeah. Of course, it doesn't have to be a famous person. It could be someone in your life, as long as they're willing for you to listen to them and maybe even record them. My English teacher, yeah, great. Loads of teachers as inspirations. That's wonderful. Robin and I talk about this so much. If you're an L2 speaker and teacher of English, you are such a perfect model for your students, because you're showing them that if they continue on this journey with you, you are what is possible. Your ability, your English level is what is possible for them. So you are all great role models for your students. Okay. If we are just talking about well-known or famous role models that students can get access to recordings of easily online, we might want to consider actors, musicians, comedians, sports stars, politicians, activists, people that are accessible to us online. Robin always talks about Fernando Alonso, the racing car driver in Spain. Robin, my colleague, is based in Spain and teaches in Spain, and said his students loved Fernando Alonso, so he used him. A couple of years ago at the IATEFL conference, I was talking about this particular topic, and I had an array of different photos of international speakers of English on the screen. And one of them was the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who his name escapes me right now. And after the he was another very famous politician, completely intelligible and successful user of English on the global stage, in politics. And after the session, some Dutch people, some Dutch teachers who'd been in the audience came up to me, and they said, we always tell our students not to speak like him because of his accent, and they thought it was really funny. And for me, I was like, wow, that blows my mind, because here he is on the world stage speaking a second language to the level that he can be understood by everyone. To me, that is a perfect role model, someone who's being successful using their own English and communicating effectively. So yeah, near peer role models can be a great motivational tool. I'm coming on to my last priority now, and this concerns allowing students to consider their goal again. So we're reflecting on what students are hoping to achieve. Now, I'm taking for this a table which comes from our book, and an activity which Robin and I have included in our book. And in this activity, we provide students with the table that you can see on screen. And we ask them to discuss with a partner or with a group what they consider to be important or very important for a native speaker accent of English and an internationally intelligible accent of English. The first thing you would do, of course, is to check that they understand what all of the aspects 1 to 7 are. So we'd give them a little bit of information there, some examples. And then we'd ask them to consider each of these in turn. And they'd put VIP for very important for pronunciation, or I if it's just important, or NIP, not important, if it's not important for pronunciation, for a native speaker accent, or for international intelligibility. I'm going to give you a minute just to have a think, in fact, not even a minute, maybe 30 seconds, to have a look at this table and to see what you think would be very important for native speaker accent or very important for international intelligibility. So what you may have thought is that for a native speaker accent, everything is very important. Everything is VIP. And if we're not pronouncing one of these, then we're not replicating a native speaker accent. However, when we consider international intelligibility, suddenly our list, our VIPs, shorten. What do we know is very important for international intelligibility? Sentence stress, focus word stress. Also, consonant sounds and vowel duration, the length of vowel sounds. Those 3 things are considered very important. So we have, by changing from a native speaker goal to one of international intelligibility, the amount of work we have to do reduces. I think that's important. Yeah, we can spend our time focusing on the most important things, prioritizing the features which are most important for international intelligibility, rather than spending so much time trying to perfect every single sound of English to a native-like level. Yeah. So we can really reduce how much time and how much effort we have to put into this by changing our goal. And students are still going to come out being a successful communicator if they focus on this list instead of this one. So I am now at the end of the session, and I'm just going to remind you or summarize some of the features that I have talked about today, which will help us to streamline and prioritize our pronunciation practice and, of course, reduce our decision paralysis as teachers. So the features that I mentioned were, or the priorities that I mentioned were, focusing on those features that will maximize your intelligibility. So consider the lingua franca core. Remember that teaching connected speech, or teaching students to produce connected speech, reduce vowel sounds and assimilation productively, not only will that be difficult and challenging and complicated, but it may have negative consequences for our listeners. But teaching connected speech for receptive purposes can be particularly helpful for our students' listening comprehension, the way that English is being used authentically. Consider a student-led approach for pronunciation. So personalizing it, find out about your students' goals. What are they going to use English for? How do they plan to use it and with whom? Use a diagnostic test or ask students to complete a communicative task and observe and note down any features that they're struggling to produce intelligibly. Encourage students to find relatable near-peer role models. You know, we want our students to take charge of their goal and to find someone who will inspire them and show them what they could be themselves. And finally, giving students the opportunity to set achievable goals. Allow them to consider what they want and what they're planning to use English for in the future. So if they are going to be in an international environment using English as a common language or a lingua franca, then they can consider that international intelligible goal, and you can prioritize those features in your classroom rather than worrying about every single sound of English and producing it to a native-like level. So I hope that these 5 priorities help to streamline your pronunciation practice and to make it a little bit easier for you if you are having decision paralysis, as I was for so many years. And thank you so much, everyone, for your attention and your comments. I think we now have some time for questions.
Yeah, you've got a few minutes left, Gemma. There are some in the Q&A. If you click on the Q&A tab, you should see the questions there. You might have to scroll a little bit to see them, and if you need any help, just ask me.
Okay. Where can you find the trictation? So Fatu, I think Fatu B has asked, where can you find the trictation activities? So this came from an article written by Mark Hancock. Mark Hancock also has a website, Hancock MacDonald ELT. You may find them on there. He often shares copies of his publications, his articles on his website. If not, you can find the article in Modern English Teacher. It was from 2023, so just last year. So it's a lovely article with great examples. Mark also has a great book out about listening and pronunciation, which I would recommend, and I use in my classroom as well. Yulia has asked, how can near-peer work in class be organised? So Yulia, I would follow, and I tend to follow that structure that I shared. So I ask students to do this for a homework activity. They have to go and find someone, usually famous, someone in the public eye who has the same mother tongue as them. And I would say to my students, find this person, try and do a little bit of research. So learn about their life. How did they learn English? What was their method? What did they do to become a successful international speaker? If you can find that information. Maybe take a couple of clips from the internet. So that could be as simple as, copying and pasting the link from an audio or from a video on YouTube and just putting it into a file or into a Word document that they can save onto their desktop. And once they've done this, they can practice listening to their role model, repeating their role model's words, or speaking with their role model. So they're getting a chance to feel how it feels to speak like their role model. And after they've done this, I would invite them to come back into class and to then present their findings to us. So tell us about their choice of role model and why, and to share with us a little bit that they have learned about their English language journey. And then going on from then, should the student wish to do it, you might want to, ask them to do this. But if they wish to, they can continue, looking for their role model, for clips, for videos of them, and adding them to their file on their role model that they can refer to, they can use for practice, they can imitate. So basically creating a file of resources based around that role model, that person. So that's how I use it in the classroom. Let's see. So Francesca P has said, aren't we creating in this way a new international language written like English but pronounced in different ways according to the part of the earth where people are from? Absolutely. Absolutely. But when we focus on intelligible English, we're focusing on the features that everyone will understand and being understood by everyone, no matter where you come from. So that's the point with an international intelligibility focus, that we're thinking no matter where we are in the world or who we're speaking to, we're focusing on the features that will make us understandable, regardless of who we're communicating with. Let's see. So Aizan, I hope I've got your name, your pronunciation correct. I probably don't. I'm so sorry. Aizan Z says, what about teaching basic intonation, like rising and falling in questions and statements? I think it is so important. Okay, so in an international context, when we have just L2 users of English, research shows us that this is not the most important thing for intelligibility. When it comes to intonation, there's so much diversity, and there's a lot of debate about how teachable intonation actually is. So this is something that if we look to the lingua franca core, it's not considered the most teachable thing, and it's not considered the most priority, the biggest priority for international intelligibility. Of course, no one's saying you can't or shouldn't teach this, but if you are pushed for time and you're in an international context, you may prefer instead to spend your time on the priorities which are known to be the most likely to cause communication breakdowns. But it depends on the context you're working in and the students you're with. That will affect the choice of features that you want to use. Okay. Oh, wow. Elvan D has said, my students have no English in their future plans. They hate it. I can't encourage them. That's really sad. And I think anyone who's made to learn a subject that they don't want to are going to put up that resistance to it. So I would say certainly that's the perfect opportunity to bring in a near peer, someone they respect, someone that they know and they like who is using English. That might be a great way to intrigue them and engage them and see if that works. I'm going to come back to the chat just in case anyone's replying to me. Okay.
So you've probably got time for one more if you want to take one.
Okay. I'm just looking for one right now. Harsha C has asked, can any application or AI technology be helpful to improve non-native speakers? Great question. Something that everyone is really interested in right now. At the moment, no, but there are lots of people working. So there are things that we can use as long as we're telling students, you know, this is not perfect yet. So things like dictation software where we speak into a microphone and then our words appear on the screen in front of us, that can be a nice way to check intelligibility and clarity, as long as we are preparing students for the possibility that, you know, they may be pronouncing intelligibly, but the software is not yet proficient enough to pick up different accents. But there are some things that can be used effectively. But yeah, at the moment, I think it's still, there is no perfect AI technology that allows us to test L2 learners' pronunciation successfully. So I think that's still to come. I hope that answers your question. How are we doing for time, Sean?
I were pretty much there, Gemma, because you've got a couple of slides left, which I presume is a thank you, but you've got time to wrap up.
Absolutely. So I've been mentioning throughout my colleague Robin Walker, so the two of us have produced this book just a couple of months ago, Teaching English Pronunciation for a Global World. It is the book I wish I had when I was starting out. It's very practical. We share lots of very simple tips and techniques about how we can meet our students' needs, focusing on international intelligibility. So if you're looking for something really practical to give you ideas that you can take into the classroom straight away, you might like it. And I think there's a sample chapter on vowel sounds just coming up on the screen. I'd also love to hear from you if you'd like to continue the discussion, and you're very free to get in touch on LinkedIn or on email, or please do come and visit us in PronSIG if you're interested in pronunciation. IATEFL PronSIG, we do so much. We have webinars, workshops, conferences, online conferences and meetings. So do come along if you're looking for ideas and support and to talk about all things pronunciation. And these are my references, if anyone is looking for references to anything that I have used. I hope it was helpful and interesting to you.
Thank you, Gemma. So yes, as Gemma said, currently on your screen, unless you've got rid of it, you should be able to click on a sample chapter of her book, her and Robin's book, sorry. So if you click on that, you should be able to get it. That'll pop up once more before the end of it. People keep asking about what they call the trictation. Did I say that right? Activities.
Dictation.
Yeah, I've put it in a few times, but actually on Mark's PronPack website, he does have them there for you to look at. You need to scroll down a bit, but you can find exactly the bit that Gemma showed on the website there. So if you're looking for those with it, and yes, I can't recommend his work enough, nor can I recommend enough the work of PronSIG, who do, as Gemma said, do a lot of free things online, a lot of things you can get involved in, even if you're not a member of their SIG. So do join in with those. And I echo what you were saying about the warning of AI, Gemma, with my voice. Whenever I try and get it to transcribe what I'm saying, it's awful. So I still need to either I need to speak better or the AI needs to get better yet for it to work. But I'm sure we'll agree that was a fabulous talk. I really loved the pacing and the construction of the talk, Gemma. Thank you so much for that. Really, really informative. Lots of activities that people could take away, and a fine way to round off our block today.